The marble floor of the Al-Qasr Palace shimmered beneath the soft golden light that filtered through intricate stained glass arches. Yasmin adjusted the slim belt of her indigo abaya for the third time, her fingers trembling as she approached the grand entrance. At 26, this was not just a new job, it was her last hope. Her mother, struggling with severe diabetes, relied on medicine Yasmin could no longer afford. The palace door opened with a solemn creak, revealing a woman of sharp elegance wrapped in a cream-colored kaftan embroidered with silver threads. Her eyes, cold and distant, sized Yasmin up in a single glance. "You are to clean the ground floor only," she said, her tone clipped. "The upper level is off limits." Yasmin bowed her head respectfully. The interior overwhelmed her, a world of opulent mosaics, fountains whispering from distant gardens, and lanterns that hung like jewels from domed ceilings. 2 hours later, as she polished the alabaster staircase with silent diligence, a sound stopped her hand. A cry, faint, brittle. It came from above, a child's cry, not of pain, but the raw sound of a soul unraveling. Yasmin's chest tightened. She knew that cry. It was the same one she'd let out when her father's heart had stopped in her arms. Without thinking, she climbed. The sound led her to a locked bath chamber near the royal suites. She pressed her palm gently against the door. "Abibti," she whispered. A hiccuped sob responded. The voice was small, yet filled with a sorrow too heavy for a child. Yasmin sank to the floor, back resting against the ornate door. "When I was little, I used to hide in washrooms too, whenever I missed someone I'd lost." There was a long silence, then the sound of the latch turning. The door creaked open, revealing a child in a silk nightdress, her head bare, a platinum blonde wig hanging limply in her hand. Tears streaked her face. "I look like a boy." Yasmin's heart cracked open. She knelt before the girl. "You're not ugly. You're strong." The girl looked up, curious. Yasmin picked up a set of colored pens from the marble vanity and smiled gently. She began drawing butterflies, tiny, delicate, radiant. An indigo one behind the ear, a rose near the forehead, and a gold one fluttering just at the nape. "Each one holds strength," she whispered. The child dashed to the mirror. Her sobs stilled. She gazed at her reflection as if seeing a new self emerge. And then, she smiled. For the first time in who knew how long, she smiled. A light so pure, it pierced the shadows in the room. Yasmin nodded. At that very moment, a silhouette filled the doorway. A tall man in a pristine white thobe, the morning sun casting him in ethereal gold. Sheikh Emir al-Rashid froze as his gaze landed on the scene. His daughter Layla, laughing. His breath caught. It had been 8 months since he'd seen joy on her face. Then he noticed Yasmin, kneeling, her hands still stained with ink, her eyes wide with surprise and humility. Despite the modest uniform, there was grace in her movements, and something about her presence that stirred something unfamiliar in him. Layla called, running to him. "Look!" Yasmin gave me butterflies. Emir knelt to embrace her, his voice thick. His eyes met Yasmin's. She stood quickly, bowing low. "I'm so sorry, Your Highness. I know I wasn't allowed, but she was crying and I..." He raised his hand gently, halting her words. "Thank you," he said, his voice hushed. Below, the bell rang. The palace physician had arrived, but Emir did not move. He stood there, watching Layla spin before the mirror, chasing her butterflies in delight. His heart, cold for so long, felt something stir. Hope. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the courtyard fountains, gilding the white stone with amber hues. From the far end of the palace, Yasmin entered softly, her cleaning satchel tucked at her side. She hadn't expected to be summoned again, but as she crossed the threshold of the princess's room, she found Layla already waiting, perched on the edge of her silk-canopied bed, the colors on her scalp slightly faded. "They're going away," Layla said, her voice small. Yasmin smiled gently, kneeling beside her. "They will always live here," she touched the girl's heart. "But sometimes, the outside needs to be painted again." Layla's eyes lit up instantly. This time, Yasmin chose the colors with more intention. "This one," she said, drawing a sapphire butterfly behind her ear, "will give you courage to take your medicine." She paused, choosing gold. When Layla looked in the mirror, her face broke into radiant joy. "Now I can take my medicines." And she did. For the first time in months, the little girl took every dose without protest. Later, she even asked to walk in the garden, something she had refused to do since her hair had fallen out. Emir watched all this from the shadowed portico, arms crossed, expression unreadable, but his chest ached, not with sorrow this time, but with awe. When Yasmin finished her work that afternoon, he approached her near the carved arches of the main hall. "I need to speak with you," he said, his tone careful. She stood straighter, alarm in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Sheikh Emir. I didn't mean to break rules. No," he interrupted gently. "I want you to come every day, officially for cleaning, but truthfully, to be with Layla." Yasmin hesitated. "I have no medical training, Your Highness." He looked her in the eyes. "You have something rarer." She accepted, her voice trembling. It was more money than she had ever imagined earning. That night, after Layla drifted to sleep, Yasmin and Emir found themselves sitting in the grand salon, the hush of the palace wrapping around them like velvet. Over cups of spiced Arabic coffee, they spoke, cautiously at first, then with slow unraveling. She told him about the father she'd lost, the mother she cared for, and how she had left her studies in early childhood education behind to clean floors and support her family. "I always dreamed of working with children," she said softly. He led her to the palace library, pulling down a worn but treasured volume on early education theory. Their hands brushed, lightly but meaningfully, over the binding. They froze, the space between them growing denser. Neither spoke. Outside, someone watched. Behind the heavy drapes, a figure stood cloaked in silence. Sheikh Hana, the palace physician, had returned under the pretense of an unscheduled checkup, but her heart, brittle and bruised, burned with something far older than professionalism. She had loved Emir for 5 years, in silence, loved him through his grief, supported him when Layla was diagnosed, offered her expertise without ever asking for reciprocation. And now, in a matter of days, this outsider had stepped into spaces Hana had never dared occupy. A slow fury bloomed behind her composed mask. At the top of the stairs, Layla appeared, rubbing her eyes, her voice sleepy and soft. "Baba, will Yasmin live here now?" Emir blinked, caught off guard. Yasmin blushed deeply. "She is a very special person, my love," he answered, still watching Yasmin. Layla clapped her hands. 1 week passed. Every morning, Yasmin drew new butterflies, each with a meaning. The green ones whispered healing, the crimson ones brought bravery, the lavender ones sang of peace. Layla transformed. She ate, she laughed. She walked barefoot in the palace gardens again. The palace doctors noted her progress with stunned admiration, unable to explain the sudden burst of recovery. Emir began to arrive home earlier each day, always finding excuses. Meetings ended early, he'd say, but his reasons were far more personal. He watched Yasmin closely, her gentleness, her way of seeing the world, her intelligence, unmarred by formality. She was unlike any woman in his elite circle. When she spoke of childhood pedagogy, her eyes gleamed in a way that stirred something long dormant in him. "Children don't need pity," she said once, arranging Layla's toys. That night, he offered her more books. When she reached for them, again their hands met. This time neither moved away. And then, "Sheikh Emir," said a voice like cold steel dipped in honey. Sheikh Hana stood in the archway, smile tight and eyes sharp. "Forgive the interruption. I hope I'm not disturbing anything." Her presence chilled the room. Since Yasmin's arrival, Hana had begun visiting daily, cloaking her jealousy beneath the banner of medical duty. But in every gesture, every phrase, she wove doubt. "Your Highness," she said later in private, "there is growing concern among the medical board." Emir stiffened. "She is improving, yes, but children with cancer are emotionally fragile." Her words were poison-coated in care. Emir wavered. The joy he saw in Layla warred with the caution of the experts. Hana pressed. That night, Emir watched Layla sleep, her head still adorned with faded butterflies. He felt the weight of Hana's warning and something heavier, fear. He did not know it yet, but seeds had been planted. And in the shadows, Hana smiled. The palace corridors glowed in warm hues as the late afternoon sun slipped through the colored glass windows, casting sapphire and crimson reflections across the white marble floors. Yasmin stood in Layla's room with a fine calligraphy pen in hand, adding the final stroke to a delicate butterfly just behind the little girl's right ear. Layla's giggle filled the room like wind chimes stirred by a desert breeze. Yasmin traced it gently. That one is for secrets. In the hallway, Emir paused by the open door, drawn in by the sound of his daughter's joy. He did not interrupt. He simply watched. The way Layla leaned into Yasmin's hands, how Yasmin's eyes softened with every detail. Something inside him shifted. Later that evening, as the scent of sandalwood rose from the palace burners and stars bloomed over the courtyard, he summoned Yasmin to his private study. She entered quietly, the hem of her abaya brushing the intricate carpet. The room smelled of oud, ink, and old books. He offered her a seat, pouring coffee into delicate cups without ceremony. "I want you to consider something," he said after a pause. "What if you returned to your studies? I could support you. The palace has a private tutor." Yasmin looked at him, startled. Her hands curled around the warm porcelain. The silence that followed was thick with the possibility of things neither dared to name. His gaze lingered on her hands, strong and graceful, and the way she tilted her head as if bracing for disappointment. Their moment was broken by a knock at the door. Emir straightened as Hana entered uninvited, a folder in hand. "I apologize," she said sweetly, "but I received word from the Council of Pediatric Medicine." She laid the folder on his desk like a verdict. Yasmin tensed. Emir opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, zoomed-in images of Layla's head, shadows misconstrued as skin reactions. He asked sharply. "A collective decision," Hana said, her voice cool. Yasmin rose. "I used only washable ink, nothing harmful. I would never—" "No one is accusing you," Hana interrupted with a smile too measured to be kind. When Yasmin left the room, her chest felt hollow. That night, she searched the web on her aging phone, reading articles on cancer treatments, immune systems, childhood trauma. Doubt crept into her thoughts like a draft beneath a sealed door. The next morning, Layla sat waiting in the window seat, her little fingers tapping the sill. Yasmin tried to smile. She hesitated, the pen trembling slightly, but she drew anyway, this time with even more care. Layers of color, strokes filled with silent promises. "I'm just worried." Layla leaned forward, her forehead pressing gently against Yasmin's. "I get better because of you." Yasmin's heart stilled. "I promise," she whispered. But far across the palace, Hana was preparing her final move. She met privately with members of the Royal Health Advisory Board. There, she presented a fabricated compilation, medical reports falsely indicating allergic reactions, emotional instability, patterns of obsession. Her tone was grave, her language cloaked in authority. By the time the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the domes of Alcázar in molten gold, she held in her hands an official document, signed by 4 specialists, urging the immediate removal of Yasmin from Layla's daily care. She arrived at the palace with purpose, her black abaya swirling behind her like a shadow. Emir sat in the study, the fire from the brass lanterns casting flickering light across his expression. He was troubled, more than usual. "This is serious, Emir," Hana said, placing the paper in front of him. "I know your heart is involved." Emir read each line carefully, his pulse thick with conflict. The words were clinical, cold, but they gnawed at his instincts. Could he be putting his daughter at risk? Hana's voice softened with practiced sympathy. For her own good. Outside, unaware, Yasmin stood at the edge of the garden, watching Layla dance with the palace birds in the golden light. And somewhere, in the perfumed air, a promise was breaking. That evening the palace seemed quieter, as though it sensed a tide about to turn. Emir called Yasmin to his office. She arrived with her usual grace, holding a small box of butterfly pens, unaware of the storm waiting behind the doors. He didn't stand. He couldn't. The weight of the decision anchored him in his chair. "Yasmin," he began. His voice was careful, rehearsed. She smiled, assuming nothing. "I cannot allow you to be alone with Layla anymore. It's for her safety. Her treatment requires structure, trained oversight." Her smile faded. Her breath caught. The box in her hands shook. "But she's getting better. You've seen it. She's eating. She's happy. She takes her medicine." "I know," he interrupted, barely holding himself together. "I know all of it. But the doctors, the board, they've made it official." Her voice cracked. "That would make it worse for her." The silence between them shattered something sacred. Yasmin slowly set the box of pens on the table, her fingers trembling. At the door, she turned back, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "Tell her I didn't want to leave, please." From the stairwell, Layla's voice echoed. "Yasmin?" Yasmin closed her eyes, then turned and walked away. Moments later, a sharp cry rose from the upper floor. Layla stood at the window, her little palms pressed to the glass. "Yasmin, my butterflies!" Inside the office, Emir collapsed into his chair, consumed by a guilt he had no words for. Beside him, Hana appeared silently, her expression gentle, falsely sorrowful. "She'll adjust." But she underestimated the bond that had formed in the quiet spaces between fear and hope. 2 weeks passed. Layla had not laughed since that day. She stopped eating, refused her medications, and cried into her pillows each night. She scratched at her scalp, desperate to bring the butterflies back. "I need my butterflies." Her fever returned. A small infection grew where she had broken the skin. Dehydration followed, and despair. Emir tried everything: gifts, stories, reassurances. But Layla turned her face to the wall. "You lied." She lied too. At the hospital, her file grew thicker. Nurses exchanged worried glances. She was deteriorating faster than they had predicted. Hana stood beside her bed, attempting to mask her guilt with clinical detachment. This was expected, she murmured to herself. Withdrawal, grief, but others weren't so sure. Anna, the lead night nurse, watched Layla closely. The child reminded her of her own niece. Same age, same fire, now dimmed. She tried to contact Yasmin that night. Her calls went unanswered, but she managed to send one message. "Layla is in hospital. She keeps asking for you. It's worse than we thought." Far from the palace, in a dim staff room at a cleaning company in the outskirts of the city, Yasmin read the message and felt her knees give out. The next morning, Layla collapsed in the bathroom, blood on her fingers, fever burning through her fragile body. She was rushed to the hospital's intensive care wing. When Emir saw her pale, limp body on the bed, a scream rose inside him, but he swallowed it down. "She won't eat," one doctor said. "Won't speak," Emir whispered. He closed his eyes. The room spun, the board, the reports, the advice, all of it, cold, calculated. In the silence, he realized he had believed the wrong people. He returned to the palace and found Layla's sketchbook beneath her pillow. On each page, drawings of butterflies, notes in childish script, symbols of love. At the end, a page with 3 stick figures, a man, a woman, and a girl. Emir didn't sleep that night. At dawn, he drove himself across the city, to a simple cleaning company where uniforms hung like ghosts on the wall. He waited by the gate, his heart pounding with guilt and fear. And then, through the morning haze, he saw her. Yasmin stepped off the bus, tired, thinner, her eyes hollowed from weeks of lost sleep. When she saw him, her steps faltered. "Yasmin," he called softly. She approached, cautious. "Sheikh Emir, she needs you," he said, voice shaking. "She's not eating. She's fading. I was wrong." Her eyes filled with pain. Will she? "I don't know." And without another word, Yasmin nodded. She pulled her scarf tighter, squared her shoulders, and followed him into the rising sun. The moment Yasmin stepped into the hospital room, a hush fell over the machines. Layla lay motionless, her skin pale beneath the blankets, eyes shut tightly. The steady beep of the monitors marked time like a quiet drumbeat of sorrow. Yasmin stood at the threshold for a heartbeat longer, taking in the sterile coldness of the space, the absence of color. Then she moved. She pulled a small pouch from her bag, a pouch she had never let go of, and from it, a single violet butterfly pen. Without saying a word, she sat beside the bed, leaned in, and whispered, "Habibti, I've come back." Layla didn't move, but a tear rolled down her cheek. Yasmin took the pen and drew, slow, tender strokes, the shape of hope, the symbol of magic. She painted one butterfly, then another, across the soft skin of the child's bald head. Then, as if guided by something ancient and sacred, she began to hum, a soft lullaby her mother used to sing, one that spoke of deserts, of moons, of stars that never left. And slowly, painfully slowly, Layla's lashes fluttered, her mouth parted. "Yasmin," Yasmin clutched her hand. "Yes, my love, I'm here." The monitors beeped faster. The nurses watching through the glass gasped. The child was responding. The attending physician rushed in. flanked by Hana, who froze mid-step when she saw Yasmin. Hana hissed, stepping forward. "She's healing my daughter," Emir said from the doorway. His voice held no room for argument. Hana turned, visibly shaken. Emir's tone was steel. "I let myself be led by fear," he continued, stepping into the room. He moved toward Yasmin and Layla, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face as color slowly returned to it. Hana turned sharply, her lips pressed into a thin line. She nodded stiffly and left, her heels echoing down the corridor like a final retreat. 2 days later, Layla was sitting up in bed, eating spoonfuls of sweet semolina porridge. Her head bore a crown of butterflies, each hand-painted anew each morning by Yasmin. The doctors called it a miracle. The nurses called it love. In the quiet of the courtyard, under the gentle sway of palm trees, Emir took Yasmin aside. "You saved her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I only gave her what she needed," Yasmin replied. He reached into the pocket of his bisht and pulled out a small object, an old, beautifully carved butterfly hairpin. It belonged to Layla's mother. I was going to give it to her one day when she was old enough to understand love. He placed the pin in Yasmin's palm. "I don't know what path lies ahead, but if there's a place for me, for us." She looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief and tenderness. He shook his head. "You are the guardian of my daughter's joy." A few steps away, Layla danced barefoot in the garden, twirling as her new butterflies caught the sunlight. "Yasmin! Baba!" Yasmin smiled. Emir offered his hand, and together, beneath the crescent moon rising over the palace domes, they stepped forward, not as master and servant, not as a sheikh and an outsider, but as two souls reshaped by love, and a little girl who taught them how to believe in magic again. The palace returned to life with Yasmin's return, but it was not the same. Though Layla had begun to recover, eating small portions, smiling, speaking in whispers, there was a fragility to her joy now, as if she feared it could be taken again at any moment. Each morning, Yasmin came to her bedside with new butterflies. This time they were softer in hue, lavender, sky blue, silvery green, symbols of peace, recovery, rebirth. The palace staff no longer whispered when they saw Yasmin. They nodded respectfully. She had become part of the rhythm of the place, not by force, but by grace. In the evenings, Emir began joining them in Layla's chamber. He would read stories while Yasmin braided Layla's growing hair, and their laughter would fill the marble halls. One evening, Layla insisted that her father sit beside Yasmin while she read her own version of a fairy tale. Emir chuckled. Layla nodded solemnly. "Very much." Yasmin's eyes dropped, her heart thudding. That night, after Layla fell asleep, Emir lingered. "You've given her something no doctor could," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the child's peaceful face. Yasmin turned toward him, the dim light catching the golden edge of her profile. "I'm just a servant, Your Highness." He stepped closer, his voice low. "No, Yasmin." The air between them thickened. The silence that followed was filled with all the things they couldn't yet say. But the world outside was not as forgiving. At the royal council meeting that week, murmurs had begun to spread. A sheikh spending every evening with a palace cleaner. A widower showing favor to a woman of no lineage, no title. Some spoke in concern, others in disdain. A few saw danger in the shift. Among them, Sheikha Hana remained silent, but her silence was sharp-edged. She watched. She waited. One morning, she requested a private audience with Layla. "I just want to check on her progress," she said smoothly. The request was granted. She entered Layla's chamber with a gentle smile, holding a gift box wrapped in violet silk. "For you," she said. Layla unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a porcelain doll, immaculate, cold, beautiful. It wore a wig of blonde curls and a tiny gold tiara. "She's perfect," Hana said. Layla looked up, puzzled. Hana's smile thinned. "She doesn't need them." Layla's fingers curled protectively around her pen set. Later that day, when Yasmin returned, she found the doll smashed on the floor and Layla curled up on the carpet, her shoulders shaking. She said, "Butterflies are pretend, but I know they're real." Yasmin held her close. "They are real, Habibti." And yet the warning was clear. Hana was not done. That evening, Emir sat alone in his private chamber, reading a letter from the royal council, a quiet warning, a subtle rebuke. He closed the parchment with a sigh. Outside, the desert winds picked up, brushing the lanterns hanging in the garden. The stars above seemed to whisper of storms ahead. Inside, Yasmin prepared tea in the kitchen, unaware of the storm forming. But across the palace, Sheikh Hana stood before her mirror, adjusting the collar of her robes. Her eyes, sharp as desert glass, reflected her resolution. If the palace could be enchanted by butterflies, it could also be scorched by truth, and she was ready to light the match. The palace gates, usually silent beneath the sun, creaked open on a morning swept by desert winds. A messenger, dressed in navy and silver, approached with purposeful steps and handed Emir a scroll sealed with the insignia of the Supreme Council of Nobility. He broke the seal with a flick of his ring. The contents were direct. A formal inquiry was being opened into his conduct, specifically into the presence and influence of an unregistered civilian within the royal residential wing, citing risks to public perception, lineage reputation, and internal affairs. He folded the scroll slowly, controlling his breath. Later that day, when Yasmin arrived for her daily visit to Layla's room, a palace guard intercepted her at the corridor. "You are to wait in the West Lounge," he said, without explanation. She obeyed, uneasy. Minutes later, Emir entered, his robes immaculate, but tension clouding his expression. "There's been a complaint," he began, voice low. Yasmin's hands clenched in her lap. "They may force your removal." Her breath caught. He stepped closer, his tone softening. "But I won't let that happen. I've called a private session with the board. I will defend you." Us. That word hung in the air between them, unspoken until now. "You don't need to do this," Yasmin whispered. "Yes, I do. For Layla. For myself." That night, the palace was heavy with silence. Even the fountains in the courtyard seemed to murmur with unease. Yasmin did not sleep. She sat by her mother's bedside at home, watching her chest rise and fall, listening to the soft hum of the oxygen machine. The thought of losing the palace, the child, the man who had looked at her like she mattered, it felt like the edge of exile. At the palace, Emir prepared his defense, gathering testimony, arranging evidence of Layla's recovery. He summoned palace staff, doctors, even nurses who had witnessed the transformation. But Sheikh Hana moved swiftly. She sent letters, untraceable rumors, suggestions that Yasmin had manipulated the child emotionally, perhaps even exploited her trust. In her version, Yasmin was a woman desperate to climb ranks, who had used tragedy as a tool. In the days that followed, whispers turned into silence. Eyes that once looked on Yasmin with respect now turned away. Even some of the staff avoided her. She noticed the change. She held her chin high, but the ache inside her grew. One evening, as the sun fell in molten strands over the domes, Layla tugged at Yasmin's sleeve. "You are," Layla said simply. Yasmin didn't reply. Layla stood, climbed onto the bed, and opened her calligraphy book. "Then I'll write a letter, a real one." Yasmin's eyes softened. Yasmin took the girl into her arms. No words came. The next day, Emir stood before the private tribunal. "The child was fading," he said, voice strong, until Yasmin returned. The butterflies weren't drawings. They were symbols of trust, of life. "You think love is dangerous?" Some listened. Others looked down at their parchments. But one voice rose among them. Dr. Samira, the palace's senior physician, stood. "I was skeptical," she admitted, "but I saw the data. And more importantly, I saw Layla's spirit return. Yasmin did what medicine couldn't." Outside, Yasmin waited. At sunset, Emir emerged. He didn't speak. He simply opened his palm to reveal a gold-embossed letter. "Reinstatement approved." Her breath hitched. Emir smiled. But the moment was interrupted by a sudden cry. From across the courtyard, a servant came running. "Layla!" Yasmin ran faster than she ever had before, her abaya billowing behind her like storm winds. Emir was close behind, his voice sharp with panic, calling Layla's name as they reached the upper corridor. The room was dim, the late sun slanting through the arched windows, golden on marble. Layla lay on the carpet, her small frame curled in on itself, hands clutched to her chest. A nurse was already at her side, checking her pulse. She collapsed while drawing. The nurse whispered, "We think it's her heart rate. Sudden drop. Stress. Fatigue." Yasmin dropped to her knees, gently pulling Layla into her lap. "Habibti, it's me." Layla stirred, her lashes fluttering. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "You're not leaving," Yasmin said, holding her tighter. Tears slipped down her cheeks, silent as prayers. Sheikh Emir knelt beside them, brushing Layla's forehead. "You're going to be all right, my little moon." Doctors arrived swiftly, and Layla was transferred to the palace clinic. Yasmin didn't leave her side, not for meals, not for sleep. She sat by her bed every hour, pen in hand, whispering stories of each butterfly. "These are guardian butterflies," she said softly, drawing a pale one just above her brow. Outside, the courtyard fountains whispered under the moonlight. 2 days passed. Layla's condition stabilized. She awoke on the third morning, her voice weak but her eyes clearer. "I dreamed I flew," she whispered to Yasmin. "You were there, and Baba." Yasmin smiled, brushing back a wisp of hair. Later that evening, as Layla rested, Emir invited Yasmin to the garden pavilion. The night was still, the desert air warm, fragrant with jasmine and oud. He poured her tea and sat across from her. For a long time, they didn't speak. Then, finally, "I was afraid," he admitted. She asked gently, "I know control is an illusion, but what I feel, that's real. I've watched you bring my daughter back to life." Yasmin looked away. "They won't accept it, Emir. Not the council, not your peers." He took her hand. The breeze swept through the pavilion, carrying with it the scent of dates and roses. He asked, "Not just for Layla." Yasmin's voice was barely a whisper. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The promise lived in the space between them, in the silence, in the way their fingers remained intertwined. But elsewhere in the palace, Sheikh Hana's final move was unfolding. She met with a distant cousin of Emir's, an ambitious nobleman with eyes on succession. Together they drafted a letter to the higher royal court. She sent the letter that night. But destiny, like butterflies, doesn't follow rules. Morning came with violet skies and the hush of anticipation. The palace staff moved in soft silence, each aware that something had shifted. In Layla's room, Yasmin stood by the window, brushing the little girl's now growing hair, while humming a lullaby only heard in the quietest of nights. "Today," Layla whispered, "can we draw butterflies on the back of my hands?" Yasmin smiled. "Of course." Outside the room, Emir spoke with the royal council's emissary, his voice firm. "I will not hide my intentions." The emissary, a thin man with lined eyes, raised a brow. "You understand what this means for your status, your role on the high table?" Emir nodded. The emissary paused, considering. "Then be prepared." The news traveled quickly, and in that tension between scandal and miracle, the people began to speak. On social forums, in markets, in universities, stories spread of the girl who healed with art, the child who smiled again, the prince who defied protocol for love. Meanwhile, in the shadowed corridors of the palace, Sheikh Hana received a response from the High Court. It was not what she expected. They would not intervene. The case had reached the public eye, and the optics were clear. Any punishment against Yasmin would be seen as cruel. She stood at her mirror, reading the parchment with trembling hands. Her reflection stared back, not victorious, but hollow. In her pursuit of preservation, she had become the very force she once claimed to fight. Rigid, distant, unloved. She dropped the letter and sat on the edge of her bed, alone. In the garden, Layla ran barefoot beneath the lanterns, a trail of butterflies painted along her arms. Yasmin followed, her laughter light, her eyes full of wonder. Emir watched from the archway, arms crossed, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "You've made this place a kingdom again," he said, stepping beside her. "It was never about the palace," Yasmin replied. Layla twirled. "Baba, Yasmin." And so they did. In the heart of the palace, under a sky bruised with stars, the three of them spun, no longer a broken family, but one reborn in color, courage, and quiet rebellion. Months passed, and the palace bloomed in new ways. The girl who once hid from mirrors now danced through the corridors with confidence, her head held high, her wrists adorned with butterfly bracelets crafted by palace artisans in tribute to her recovery. Yasmin, no longer clad in the uniform of a servant, now wore flowing gowns in soft desert hues. She had taken a formal role within the palace, head of children's well-being initiatives, appointed by Emir himself. Her work inspired reforms across the royal educational sector, with arts and emotional healing now integrated into hospital programs. Outside the palace gates, children painted butterflies on their notebooks. Shopkeepers named confections after Layla's favorite colors, and a national charity was founded, the Wings of Hope Foundation. chaired by Yasmin and Layla together. Still, not all corners of the court were pleased. Some nobles withdrew their support. Old allies turned quiet, but Emir stood resolute. He met them with calm strength, backed by the love of his daughter and the quiet revolution his heart had chosen. One morning, in a garden heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine, Emir approached Yasmin as she sat sketching new butterfly designs for the children's ward. He knelt before her, not with ceremony, but with sincerity. From his pocket, he produced a ring, a single pearl nested in gold, shaped like a butterfly's wing. "Not for status, not for show," he said, his voice warm, "but for the woman who reminded me what love means." Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. Layla burst from behind a column, arms wide. The wedding was small, just family, just heart. No grand parade, no political guests. Under the moonlight, in the marble courtyard where it all began, they vowed not to power, but to presence, to never abandoning one another, to honoring what grew between sorrow and hope. And above them 1,000 paper butterflies drifted down from the balconies, each one painted by a child in the palace school. Symbols of what was lost, symbols of what had been found. Layla stood between them, her arms stretched like wings. "We are not just royal," she said in her speech. "We are a family of butterflies." And in that moment, in a land of tradition and transformation, beneath minarets and moonlight, a new chapter began. Not one of fairy tales, but of real love, of healing, of flight. The weeks after the wedding carried a new rhythm for the palace. Where once there had been silence, now the corridors pulsed with laughter, music, and the quiet shuffle of Layla's running feet. The courtyard smelled of oud and rosewater. Fountains reflected lanterns shaped like crescent moons. Even the staff moved differently, lighter, as if the air itself had softened. But beyond the palace walls, not all were pleased. At the Majlis of Riyadh, whispers had turned into formal debates. A faction of noblemen gathered, draped in bishts heavy with gold embroidery, their voices sharp as desert winds. "She has no lineage," one argued. "She was a servant," another spat. Yet a younger voice rose among them. Prince Tariq, Emir's cousin. "Tell me," he said, "what message does it send if a sheikh denies the very love that saved his daughter?" The chamber fell into murmurs. No resolution was reached. But the tension thickened like the air before a sandstorm. Inside the palace, Yasmin felt the shift. She had grown accustomed to stares, to whispers, but now there was a weight pressing at the edges of her newfound role. Invitations to banquets were delayed. Couriers hesitated before delivering letters. One evening, as she tucked Layla into bed, she whispered her worry. Layla, already drowsy, clutched her hand. "Of course you do. The palace didn't shine until you came." Yasmin laughed softly, kissing her forehead. Later that night, she found Emir in his private library, papers spread before him, correspondence from the Majlis. His brow was furrowed, his jaw tense. "They want me to step down from the council," he said quietly. Yasmin asked. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his. He looked at her then, not as a sheikh weighed by politics, but as a man who had already chosen. "I will not bow to them. The desert bends to the storm, Yasmin, but it always rises again." She leaned against his shoulder, and for the first time that day, he smiled. But as the winds howled beyond the palace gates, far away in Doha, a rival Emir read the reports with interest. His lips curved into a knowing smile. "Love has made Al-Rashid vulnerable," he murmured. The desert was preparing a new trial. The palace courtyard glowed under the crescent moon, but Emir's thoughts were heavy. Reports had arrived of growing unrest in the Majlis, murmurs that his marriage had weakened the prestige of the house of Al-Rashid. Yasmin sensed it too. The air in the palace had shifted. More guards at the gates, more whispers in the halls, more letters arriving sealed in crimson wax. One morning, during breakfast in the inner garden, Emir read a message with a grave expression. Layla was painting butterflies on parchment, Yasmin at her side, when he suddenly crumpled the parchment in his fist. Yasmin asked softly. Emir's jaw tightened. "The Emir of Doha has offered a solution to the Majlis. He proposes a political alliance through marriage with his daughter. If I agree, he will silence the opposition. If I refuse..." He paused, glancing at Layla. Layla looked up, frowning. "But Baba, you're already married." Her innocence pierced the silence. Yasmin touched the girl's hand, her voice steady though her heart raced. Emir rose, pacing the length of the pavilion. His white thobe moved like storm clouds around him. This is not just politics anymore. It's a warning. That night, Yasmin wandered the palace gardens, her thoughts restless. She knelt by the fountain, the moonlight reflecting in the water, and whispered a prayer. Inshallah, let me be strong enough for Layla. She did not notice the shadow watching from the colonnade. Sheikh Hana stood hidden, her eyes glinting with quiet calculation. Though her letter to the High Court had failed, she saw now a greater storm rising and an opportunity to reclaim her influence. The next day, Emir received an invitation to a state banquet in Abu Dhabi, hosted by the Crown Prince himself. Attendance was not optional. The eyes of the Gulf would be upon him, his marriage, and his choices. "Then we go together," Yasmin said when he told her. Her voice did not waver. Emir looked at her long, as though weighing the risk. Finally, he nodded. But even as he spoke, word spread through rival courts, and far away in Doha, the Emir smiled. The banquet would not just be a celebration, it would be a battlefield. The palace of Abu Dhabi shone like a jewel beneath the desert night, its marble courtyards filled with dignitaries, princes, and foreign envoys. Lanterns cast 1,000 colors across fountains that rose like silver columns against the sky. Music from the oud drifted through the air, delicate and haunting. Yasmin stepped through the gates at Emir's side, her abaya a deep sapphire embroidered with golden threads that shimmered like wings. Layla walked between them, clutching Yasmin's hand, her wrists painted with new butterflies for courage. The crowd turned. Whispers rippled like wind through palm leaves. For every voice of scorn, there was one of awe, but the eyes of the court weighed heavy, each glance a blade. At the center of the great hall, the Crown Prince welcomed them with formal warmth. His gaze shifted to Yasmin. Yasmin bowed, her movements graceful, but her heart thundered. Dinner began. Platters of lamb with saffron rice, trays of dates dipped in honey, tiny cups of steaming Arabic coffee. Yet beneath the clinking of dishes, tension swirled. Nobles leaned close, murmuring, testing, watching. It was the Emir of Doha who finally broke the mask of politeness. Rising from his seat, he raised his cup. "To Sheikh Emir," he announced, his voice carrying across the hall. A ripple of laughter followed, soft but sharp. Emir's eyes narrowed. The Emir smiled thinly. Courage can inspire. The hall stilled. Before Emir could respond, a small voice rose. Layla, standing on her chair, her little arms raised high to show the painted butterflies. She cried, "It's strong, because we love each other." Gasps echoed. Some nobles laughed, others frowned, but many eyes softened. For in that child's voice, truth cut through politics. The Emir's smile faltered. He sat down slowly, his cup untouched. Emir pulled Layla gently into his arms, kissing her hair. Yasmin's eyes brimmed with pride and fear all at once. But in the shadows of the courtyard, Sheikh Hana watched. And though Layla's words had touched many, Hana knew the battle was not yet won. Public defiance was one thing. Surviving the consequences was another. The banquet ended, but its echoes lingered long after the lanterns dimmed. By dawn, the Majlis in Riyadh was already ablaze with debate. Some praised the courage of Emir's daughter, calling her words a sign of purity and divine blessing. Others scoffed, furious that the dignity of royal chambers had been reduced to the speech of a child. Within the palace, Yasmin woke early to find new eyes upon her. Courtiers who once turned away now offered subtle nods, even hesitant smiles. The story of Layla's butterflies had reached the streets, the markets, the mosques. Children were drawing butterflies on their hands. Women painted them on fabrics. Men etched them into silver. Hope was spreading. Yet hope was dangerous. Emir returned from council that afternoon, his features carved in stone. "The Emir of Doha has not conceded," he said. "He's pushing for a formal review of my seat at the high table." Yasmin felt the weight of his words press against her chest. Silence. Only the sound of fountains in the courtyard. Finally, Yasmin whispered, "If I am the cause, then let me go." Emir turned to her, eyes blazing. "Do not speak of vanishing. You are not my weakness, Yasmin. You are my strength." That night, the palace was restless. The wind howled through the arches, carrying whispers of change. In her private chamber, Sheikha Hana met with emissaries in secret. If Emir falls, the court will fracture. Doha waits for this moment. One emissary bowed his head. Hana's lips pressed thin. The next day, a new rumor spread across the city that Yasmin's mother had once begged for money in the spice markets of Dubai, that Yasmin herself had been seen bargaining with merchants like a common street girl. The whispers grew louder. By sunset, they reached the palace gates. Servants murmured. Guards avoided her gaze. And though Emir dismissed it as lies, Yasmin felt the sting of every whisper like a knife. That evening, she stood alone on the balcony, staring at the desert horizon. The moon hung low, a silver crescent over shifting sands. But even as she spoke, a storm darker than rumor was brewing. For in the heart of Doha, the Emir had summoned allies, princes, merchants, men of influence. And with their pact sealed over incense and Arabic coffee, a plan was born. Not just to challenge Emir, but to bring the house of al-Rashid to its knees. The desert winds carried unease. For days, the palace gates had been restless with unusual visitors. Couriers arriving at odd hours, officials demanding audience, letters sealed in unfamiliar crests. Something was shifting, and Yasmin felt it in her bones. One afternoon, as she walked with Layla through the jasmine gardens, a guard intercepted them. His expression was tense. "Your Highness, forgive me," he said, bowing to Layla before turning to Yasmin. "A messenger has delivered urgent news." Yasmin's heart stopped. "In Dubai," Layla clutched Yasmin's hand. "You must go, Habibti." Torn between duty to Layla and the cry of her own blood, Yasmin looked to Emir. That night, in his study lit by golden lanterns, he took her hands. "Go to her," he said softly. "I will guard Layla as you have guarded her." But what Yasmin did not know was that the illness had been no accident. In Doha, the Emir smiled as reports arrived. "Divide her heart, and you divide their strength. While she runs to her mother, the palace will weaken." Yasmin departed at dawn, the caravan winding across the dunes. As she left, Layla slipped a folded paper into her palm. "A butterfly for you," she whispered. The drawing was shaky but bright, a golden butterfly with wings wide open. Yasmin pressed it to her heart, holding back tears. Back in the palace, Emir found himself surrounded by new pressures. Letters from the Majlis grew harsher, demanding he renounce Yasmin or face expulsion from the council. Hana, ever the serpent in silk, whispered to him during a private meeting, "You cannot fight both love and politics, Emir." But Emir's resolve was steel. Yet while his words rang true, danger crept closer. For that same night, as Layla slept with her butterfly drawings scattered across her bed, a figure slipped past the outer gates, hooded, silent, carrying orders from Doha. The palace lanterns flickered in the wind. Shadows stretched long across the marble. The storm was no longer distant. It was inside the gates. The palace was restless that night. Servants whispered of strange figures glimpsed near the stables, of doors left ajar that should have been sealed, of torches extinguished without wind. Emir doubled the guard, but unease clung to the marble halls like smoke. In her chamber, Layla stirred. She dreamed of butterflies, golden, luminous, but as she reached for them, a shadow swept across the sky. Her eyes flew open. The lantern by her bedside had gone out. From the darkness near the balcony, a figure moved, hooded, silent. Layla gasped, clutching her pen set like a weapon. Before she could scream, the intruder spoke, voice low and sharp. "Do not cry out, little princess." But she did scream, shrill and piercing, echoing through the halls. Within moments, Emir burst through the door, sword in hand, his throw billowing like a storm. Guards followed, lanterns blazing. The intruder leapt back, scaling the balcony with unnatural speed, vanishing into the night before steel could strike. Emir rushed to his daughter, holding her trembling form close. "You're safe, Layla." Her small voice shook. They wanted to take me." On the floor by her bed lay a slip of parchment, dropped by the intruder in haste. Emir snatched it up, his eyes narrowing as he read the words scrawled in dark ink. "Butterflies cannot live in palaces." Emir's hand tightened, crumpling the paper. By dawn, the palace was in uproar. Layla's guards were tripled, every gate sealed, every servant questioned. But the message was clear. This was no rumor, no whisper. It was war. That same day, Yasmin arrived in Dubai to find her mother recovering, frail but alive. Yet even as she sat at her mother's side, her heart twisted. She felt the pull of the palace, of Layla, of Emir. She could not shake the unease, as though a storm had broken in her absence. And she was right, for in Riyadh, the Majlis convened in an emergency session. Rivals, emboldened by the attack, pressed harder than ever. Sheikh Emir cannot protect his own child, one declared. Meanwhile, Emir stood at the palace gates, gazing into the horizon where the desert met the sky. His hand rested on the hilt of his blade. He whispered, not to soldiers, not to courtiers, but to the wind itself. You will not take her. You will not take them. But deep in Doha, the emir listened to reports with satisfaction. The palace trembles, he murmured, and the butterfly queen is far from home. Yasmin felt the pull of destiny like a thread around her chest. Though her mother begged her to stay a few more days in Dubai, she knew her place was elsewhere. On the third morning, she kissed her mother's forehead, whispered a prayer, and departed before sunrise. The caravan crossed the dunes swiftly, the winds carrying her urgency. By the time the palace domes shimmered into view, her heart was pounding with dread. She was barely through the gates when Layla ran to her, arms flung wide, butterflies painted all along her arms as if to shield herself. Yasmin knelt, gathering the child into her embrace. They tried to take me, Layla whispered into her shoulder, but Baba stopped them, and I prayed you would come back. Yasmin held her tighter. Nothing can keep me from you, Habibti. That evening, Emir summoned Yasmin to his private chamber. The parchment left by the intruder lay on the table between them. They will try again, Emir said, his voice low, his eyes dark with sleeplessness. The council grows louder. The Emir of Doha sharpens his claws. Yasmin met his gaze, steady and unflinching. Then let us show them the truth. Emir studied her, the weight of his doubts clashing with the fire in her eyes. Finally, he nodded. Then you will stand with me at the next council session, before the Majlis, before the rivals, before the Emir himself. The decision was made. The next week, the Majlis convened in Riyadh. The great hall was crowded with nobles in flowing bishts, the scent of oud heavy in the air, the tension palpable. As Emir entered, Yasmin at his side, and Layla holding her hand, a wave of murmurs swept through the chamber. But look, the child is with her. The council head rose, his voice booming. Sheikh Emir, you are summoned to defend your actions. Emir's voice was thunder. I deny nothing. I chose love, and in that choice, my house was reborn. Do you not see it? Yasmin stepped forward then, her voice calm but piercing. I was born without titles. I have no lineage carved in marble, but I brought hope where your laws could not. Gasps filled the chamber. Some faces hardened, others softened, and among them, the Emir of Doha smiled thinly, as though waiting for this moment. He rose, his robes trailing like a shadow across the floor. Beautiful words, he said smoothly. But words do not secure thrones. Power does. The hall erupted into shouts. Emir drew Yasmin and Layla close, his voice steady in the storm. Then let them come. And as the Majlis descended into chaos, Yasmin felt it. The storm had broken. The final battle was no longer a threat. It was here. The council chamber emptied into the streets of Riyadh like wildfire. By nightfall, the city pulsed with rumors. Some claimed Sheikh Emir had defied the Majlis entirely. Others whispered that the Emir of Doha had vowed to see his crown broken. Inside the palace, tension thickened with every hour. Guards lined the halls, merchants sent warnings of caravans being stopped at borders, and couriers whispered of alliances forming against al-Rashid. In the Grand Majlis of Doha, the Emir gathered his allies, princes, merchants, men hardened by ambition. The air was thick with smoke from burning oud, the walls glowing with torchlight. Sheikh Emir has given us all the weapon we need, the Emir declared. He has placed a servant on his throne. He has mocked tradition. The people may love their stories of butterflies, but the gulf runs on bloodlines, not fairy tales. They plotted not only through politics, but through force, sabotage, disruption of trade. The Emir's eyes gleamed as he spread maps across the table. We strike not at his sword, but at his walls, at his people. Back in Riyadh, Yasmin felt the weight of what was coming. She walked the moonlit gardens with Layla, trying to mask her fear. Layla asked, her small hand clutching Yasmin's. "Because they forget what truly matters," Yasmin answered softly. "They think power is everything, but power cannot heal a child." Layla stopped, looking up at her with wide, serious eyes. That night, Emir found Yasmin on the balcony, gazing at the desert horizon where lightning flickered in the distance. "They will come for us," he said, voice low. "Not only with words, but with threats, with force." Yasmin turned to him, her face pale but resolute. "Then we stand as we always have." He reached for her hand, and in the silence, their fear intertwined with unshakable resolve. At that very moment, a messenger arrived, breathless from travel. He fell to his knees, holding out a sealed scroll. Emir broke the seal. The words were few, but they cut like a blade. "Your house will burn before the next crescent moon." He crumpled the letter, his jaw tightening. And for the first time in centuries, the House of al-Rashid prepared not for ceremony, but for battle. The night of the crescent moon arrived, heavy with silence. The palace glowed beneath lantern light, yet an unease coiled through its halls like a serpent. Guards stood double at every gate, their spears reflecting the torches, their eyes sharp against the darkness. In her chamber, Yasmin sat with Layla, brushing her hair and whispering stories of butterflies that could fly even through fire. But her voice faltered when she heard it, the distant thunder of hooves. The alarm bells rang out across the palace. From the dunes, riders surged forth, cloaked men bearing the Emir of Doha's crest, their blades glinting under moonlight. Arrows whistled through the night air, clashing against the palace walls. Emir was already on the battlements, sword in hand, his thobe flowing like a banner of defiance. He roared, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Protect the house!" The courtyard erupted in violence. Guards clashed with intruders, steel against steel, shouts piercing the desert winds. The scent of smoke and burning oil filled the air as torches were hurled against the gates. Inside, Yasmin pulled Layla close, her heart pounding. "Stay with me, Habibti." They fled through the corridors as the walls trembled with the force of battle. At every corner, shadows loomed, steel flashed. Twice, Yasmin shielded Layla behind her as guards intercepted the intruders. The child's small hands clutched her butterfly drawings, the paper crumpled and smudged with fear. Emir fought like a lion on the walls, his blade cutting through the tide. But he knew the assault was not meant to conquer. It was meant to break his spirit, to reach the heart of the palace where his daughter lay. In the east corridor, Yasmin and Layla were cornered. 3 men advanced, their faces hidden, their steps deliberate. Yasmin spread her arms, shielding the child behind her. "You will not touch her," she hissed. One of the men laughed. "A servant playing queen." Before Yasmin could answer, a voice thundered from behind. Emir stormed into the corridor, blade raised high, his eyes blazing with fury. The clash was brutal. Steel rang against steel, sparks flying across the marble. Yasmin held Layla close, whispering prayers as Emir struck down one foe, then another. The third turned and fled into the shadows. At last, silence fell in the corridor. Emir stood panting, his blade dripping, his thobe torn. He dropped to his knees before Layla, pulling her into his arms. "You are safe," he whispered, trembling. But even as he held her, Yasmin knew the night was not over. From the courtyard came the roar of more riders, the clash of more steel. The battle raged on, the palace trembling under its weight. And above them, the crescent moon glowed faintly, as if watching to see whether butterflies could truly survive the storm. The battle raged until dawn. Smoke curled above the palace domes, and the air reeked of sweat, steel, and burning oil. But the walls of al-Rashid still stood, and Emir still held his sword. By sunrise, the last of the riders fled back into the desert, their banners torn, their plan undone. The Emir of Doha had struck with fury, but he had not broken them. Exhausted, Emir stood in the courtyard, his thobe streaked with ash and blood, his guards battered, yet unyielding around him. The people of Riyadh, drawn by the chaos, gathered outside the gates. When they saw him standing tall with Yasmin at his side and Layla perched on his arm, alive and unbroken, a cheer rose like thunder. "Al-Rashid!" Emir raised his blade high, but his voice carried not of war, but of defiance touched by hope. "You wished to see if love would fall. Look now, it stands." Yasmin stepped forward then, her voice softer yet piercing the crowd. I was born without titles, but last night I fought as fiercely as any queen, not with a sword, but with faith. And this house did not fall because we stood together. This is not weakness. The people roared, their chants echoing across the city. And though the Majlis remained divided, the tide had shifted. In markets, in homes, in mosques, the story spread. The night the butterflies survived the storm. Later that evening, as the palace settled into weary silence, Yasmin sat with Layla in the garden. The child painted one last butterfly on her palm, a large golden one with wings stretched wide. "This one," Layla said with a sleepy smile, "is for us." Emir joined them, his arm around Yasmin, his eyes softened by exhaustion, but alight with pride. The desert night was calm again, the fountains whispering in the courtyard. Above, the crescent moon hung like a promise renewed, and in that quiet, as Layla's laughter mingled with the hush of the wind, the house of al-Rashid was no longer a symbol of politics or lineage. It was a home reborn, built not of marble and law, but of butterflies, resilience and love that no storm could erase. The butterflies had flown through fire, and they had survived.